classic starts. Heidi. Retold from the Johanna Spyri original by Lisa Church. Illustrated by Jamal Akib. Chapter 1, Up the Mountain. Heidi, keep up! The words stung the ears of the overdressed 5-year-old. She nodded to her aunt and hurried her step. The 3 dresses she had on, one on top of the other, and the thick wool shawl wound about her made her step slow on such a hot June day. "Are you tired?" Aunt Deet asked. "No," answered the child. "I am hot. We shall soon get to the top. You must walk bravely on a little longer and take good long steps." "We will be there in another hour," the woman said in a cheerful voice. It seemed like hours since they had left Dorfly and begun their way up the footpath. But in truth, it had only been 1 hour. Just enough time had passed to take them to a small village built into the side of the mountain. People usually stopped here to rest and visit with friends on their way to the top. But today the young woman and the child did not stop to rest. The trip they were on was too important to interrupt with friendly visits. "If you're going farther up the mountain, I will walk with you, Deet," a woman called out. Deet waved and nodded to the woman. She slowed her steps a little so the older lady could join her. "I suppose this is the child your sister left?" the woman asked when she saw Heidi. "Yes," answered Deet. "I am taking her to live with her grandfather." "You're going to leave that child with him? You must be crazy. How can you do such a thing? The old man won't take her in, anyway. He will throw both of you out the minute you arrive." "He can't very well do that," Dee answered. "He is her grandfather. I have taken care of her since her mother died when the poor babe was only 1. But now I have some great chances coming my way. I am finally going to have a nice place to live and work. It's about time that her grandfather does his duty." "So you are just going to leave the child with the old man and move away?" the old woman asked in surprise. "It's hard for me to believe that you could do such a thing." "What do you mean?" asked Deet. "I have done my duty with Heidi. What do you think I should do with her? I can't take her with me." The old woman never gave her an answer. The house she was stopping to visit appeared before them. Deet remembered this hut. A younger woman lived there with her mother and her son, Peter. Almost everyone knew the 11-year-old boy. Each morning he would go down to the valley to fetch the goats. Then he would drive them up the mountain and take care of them until it was time to go home for the night. "Good luck to you," the old woman called as she went inside to see grandmother. Deet waved her hand and watched as the lady walked toward the small brown hut. She didn't want to admit that her friend could be right. She took a minute to straighten her hat and then turned around to look for Heidi. She needed to get on with her trip. Chapter 2. Meeting Grandfather. Heidi was enjoying watching the goats and the boy who led them. She struggled to keep up with him as he sprang from one rock to another. The layers of clothing she had on prevented her from getting close enough to speak to him. All at once Heidi sat herself down on the ground. She began pulling off her shoes and stockings as fast as her little fingers could move. When this was done, she unwound the hot red shawl and threw it off. Then she took off her coat, too. There was still another one underneath to unfasten. Her aunt had put her Sunday coat on atop her everyday one to save her from carrying it. Quick as lightning, this one went, too. Heidi stood up. She was now wearing only the little slip that she had started out with this morning. She put all her clothes together in a tidy little heap and then went jumping and climbing after Peter and the goats. Peter had barely noticed the girl. When he suddenly saw her appear in her undergarments, his face broke into a grin. Heidi questioned him on everything from the goats' homes to how many there were. She had lost herself in her talking when she arrived at the spot where Deet stood. "Heidi, what have you been doing? What a sight you have made of yourself. And where are your 2 coats and the red shawl? And the new shoes I bought and the new stockings I knitted for you? Everything is gone. Not a thing left. What were you thinking, Heidi? Where are all your clothes?" The child quietly pointed to a spot on the mountainside below and answered, "Down there." Deet followed the direction of her finger. She could just make out something lying on the ground. The pile had a spot of red on top of it, which she knew had to be the shawl. "You rotten little thing," exclaimed Deet angrily. "What could have made you do something like that? What made you undress yourself? What do you mean by it?" "I don't want any clothes," said the child. "You selfish child. Don't you have any sense at all?" Her aunt was red with anger. "Who is going all that way down to get them? It will take a half-hour to walk down there. Peter, you go off and fetch them for me as quickly as you can. Get going! Now!" Peter followed the order, completing the run in a shorter amount of time than Deet thought possible. She gave him a coin for his quickness. Peter's face beamed with delight as he put it into his pocket. The young boy followed Deet and Heidi on the final part of their climb. After almost an hour, they reached the top of the mountain. Grandfather's hut stood on a cliff where every ray of sun could rest upon it. It also had a full view of the valley below. It was a beautiful place. An old man was sitting outside the hut, watching the 3 people come toward him. He waited patiently for them to speak first. "Good evening, Grandfather," Heidi said. The young girl was not shy with her words. "What is the meaning of this?" her grandfather asked gruffly. He gave the child an abrupt shake of the hand and looked at her from under his bushy eyebrows. Heidi stared back at him. She couldn't take her eyes off his face. The grandfather before her had a long beard and thick gray eyebrows that grew together over his nose. They looked just like a bush. "I wish you good day," said Deet when she and Peter finally reached the old man. "I have brought you Tobias and Adelheide's child. You probably don't recognize her. You haven't seen her since she was a baby." "What has she got to do with me?" the old man asked. "And you, boy," he continued, "be off with your goats. And take mine with you." One look at the old man made Peter obey at once. It was easy to see that Heidi's grandfather wanted him gone. "The child is here to stay with you," Deet said. "I have done my duty by taking care of her over the last 4 years. Now it is time for you to do yours." "That's it," said the old man. He looked at her with a flash in his eye. "And when the child begins to cry and whine after you leave as they do when they miss homes and mothers, what am I supposed to do with her then?" "That's your problem," snarled Deet. "I put up with her as a crying baby when her real mother died. It was hard enough to take care of my mother and myself. Now I have the chance to go out and be on my own. I cannot pass this up. You are her nearest relative. You are in charge. And keep in mind that you will have to answer for it if anything happens to the girl." Heidi's grandfather did not like the way Deet spoke to him. And Deet knew that leaving such a small child with this old man was a horrible thing to do. She felt shame and embarrassment as he kicked her out of his house. "Goodbye to you then, and to you, too, Heidi," she called. She quickly turned away and started to run down the mountainside. As she passed the neighbors standing at doors and open windows, Deet heard their cries, "Where is the child? Where have you left the child?" Her mouth opened, but she couldn't answer. She had left her alone with an old man whom everybody knew was not very nice. Would their cries ever stop ringing in her ears? Chapter 3, At Home with Grandfather. As soon as Deet disappeared, the old man went back to his bench. He stared at the ground without making a sound. Heidi, meanwhile, was enjoying looking about her new home. She explored until she found a shed built against the hut. This was where the goats were kept, but it was empty. Heidi continued her search and came to the pine trees behind the hut. She listened to the wind whistle through the branches and then headed back to her grandfather. Heidi placed herself in front of the old man and simply stared at him. The old man looked up slowly. "What is it that you want?" he asked. "I want to see inside the house," said Heidi. "Come on, then," her grandfather said. He rose and walked toward the hut. "Bring your bundle of clothes in with you," he told her. "I don't want them anymore," was her quick answer. The old man turned to look at her. Seeing her dark eyes sparkling with excitement over what she was going to see next made him think about his answer. "Why don't you want them anymore?" he finally asked. "Because I want to run around like the goats with their thin light legs." "Well, you can do that if you like," said her grandfather, "but bring them in anyway. We'll put them in the cupboard." Heidi did as she was told. The old man opened the door and Heidi stepped inside after him. She found herself in a good-sized room that covered the whole first floor of the hut. In one corner stood grandfather's bed. In another was the fireplace with a large kettle hanging above it. On the farther side was a large door in the wall. This was the cupboard. Grandfather opened it. Inside were his clothes, cups, glasses, plates, smoked meat, and cheese. Heidi ran to the shelf and thrust in her bundle of clothing as quickly as she could. She pushed them as far behind her grandfather's things as possible. She wanted to make sure they would not be found. Then she looked carefully around the room and asked, "Where am I to sleep, grandfather?" "Wherever you like," he answered. Heidi was delighted and began at once to check out every nook and corner. On the wall near her grandfather's bed, she saw a short ladder. She climbed up and found herself in a hayloft. There was a large heap of fresh, sweet-smelling hay. There was also a round window in the wall. "I shall sleep up here, grandfather," she called down to him. "It's lovely up here. Come up and see how lovely it is." "Oh, I know all about it," he called up. "I am getting my bed ready now," she called down again. "I am going to need a sheet." "All right," her grandfather said. He went to the cupboard and spent a few minutes digging around before he came out with a long, rough piece of material that would have to do for a sheet. The two worked together to shape the hay into a child-sized bed. They spread the material over the hay, tucking it in until it looked tidy and comfortable. "The only thing left is a cover," Heidi said. She smiled at her cozy new spot. Her grandfather left the loft and returned a minute later with a large, thick sack. "Here," he said. "This should work." When they got the sack spread neatly over the bed, it looked so warm and comfortable that Heidi squealed with delight. "This bed looks so lovely. I wish it were night so I could get inside at once." "I think we should have something to eat first," her grandfather said. "What do you think?" In the excitement of bed making, Heidi had forgotten everything else. But now she felt terribly hungry. When lunch was over, grandfather went outside to put the goat shed in order. Heidi watched him sweep it out and put in fresh straw for the goats to sleep on. She played along the mountainside while the old man did his chores. The time until evening passed happily. Heidi was skipping and dancing around the tall trees when she heard a shrill whistle. She and her grandfather watched as the goats came springing down from the mountain tops. Heidi sprang forward to greet all of the goat friends she had made that morning. Two of the beautiful, slender animals, one white and one brown, ran to where grandfather was standing. "Are they ours, grandfather? Are they both ours?" Heidi giggled and jumped around with glee. The white one is named Little Swan and the brown one is Little Bear, he answered. Now help me feed these hungry animals. Heidi helped feed them and send them to sleep. Then she quickly finished her own dinner. She was anxious to try out her new bed. Soon Heidi was sleeping sweetly and soundly. She knew nothing of the strong winds outside that caused the wooden beams of the hut to groan and creak with anger. Her dreams kept away the haunting sounds of branches snapping among the trees. In the middle of the night the old man got up. The child will be frightened, he murmured softly to himself. He climbed the ladder to the loft and stood by Heidi's bed. In the little bit of moonlight left, he could see the face of the sleeping girl. She lay under the heavy sheet, her cheeks rosy and her head peacefully resting on her little round arm. She actually had a smile on her face, as if in the middle of a pleasant dream. The old man stood looking down at the child until the moon disappeared behind the clouds and he could see no more. Chapter 4, Out with the Goats. Heidi awoke the next morning with a smile on her face. She felt so happy in her new home. She remembered all the things that she had seen the day before and was excited to see them again today. She quickly jumped out of bed and ran outside, joyful at the sound of Peter's voice. While Heidi washed and made herself tidy, Grandfather packed a good lunch for her. In minutes she was out on the mountainside with the goats. "Come along," Peter yelled to Heidi. "Your grandfather gave me orders to watch you." Heidi listened to what he said and followed the boy until he slowed to rest his goats. Peter checked on his herd and then fell asleep on the warm ground. Heidi sat near him. Suddenly she heard a loud cry overhead. Lifting her eyes, Heidi saw a bird. It was larger than any she had ever seen before. It had great, spreading wings and was wheeling around and around in wide circles. "Peter, Peter, wake up," called out Heidi. "See the great bird! Look! Look!" Peter got up and they watched the bird together until it disappeared behind the mountain tops. "Where has it gone?" asked Heidi. "Home to its nest," said Peter. "Let's go see." Heidi answered with glee. "No," Peter said firmly. "Even the goats can't climb that high. Stay here while I get lunch." Heidi frowned, but only for a second. The goats were playing about her and she wanted to join them. "Tell me their names," she sang to Peter as he placed her bread and cheese before her. "That one with big horns is Turk. He always wants to ram the other goats. Most of them run when they see him coming. The only one who stays is Greenfinch. She is the little goat there. She's very brave and so quick that Turk often doesn't see her coming." All of a sudden Peter leaped to his feet and ran after one of the goats. Heidi followed him as fast as she could. They dashed through the middle of the flock and toward the side of the mountain. By the time Peter reached the mountainside, Greenfinch was leaping in the direction of the cliff. Peter threw himself down and grabbed one of her hind legs. The goat was surprised and began to bleat angrily. She tried to get free and wriggled so much that Peter had to call to Heidi for help. Heidi ran right up. She saw the danger both Peter and the animal were in and quickly gathered a bunch of sweet-smelling leaves. She held them under Greenfinch's nose, saying, "Come on, Greenfinch. You must not be naughty. Look, you might fall down there and break your leg." The young animal quickly turned and began to eat the leaves out of Heidi's hand. Meanwhile Peter stood up and took hold of Greenfinch by the band around her neck. Heidi took hold of her other side in the same way. Together they led the wanderer back to where the rest of the flock was feeding peacefully. Now that they were back to safety, Peter wasted no time in scolding the animal. He lifted his stick as he yelled, ready to give her a good swat as punishment. "No, no, Peter," Heidi cried out. You must not hit her. See how frightened she is. She needs it, Peter growled and lifted his stick again. Heidi quickly put herself between the boy and the goat. You have no right to touch her. It will hurt her. Leave her alone. Peter looked with surprise at the little girl. He thought about how kind she was. Heidi had given him most of her lunch today just because she thought he looked hungry. No one had ever done such a nice thing for him. And now she wanted to spare this naughty animal. Peter put down the stick. I will let her go if you will give me some more of your cheese tomorrow, he said. He was still frowning about the scare the goat had given him. You shall have it all, tomorrow and every day, replied Heidi. I don't want it. And I will give you bread, too, a large piece like you had today. But then you must promise never to hit Greenfinch or any of the other goats. All right, said Peter. It's a deal. And it seemed the boy really did mean to keep his word. Chapter 5, The Visit to Grandmother. Day after day Heidi spent her time with Peter. They went high into the meadows and among the rocks and the flowers. When the weather finally grew cold and grandfather told Heidi to stay home, Peter felt the same unhappiness as the young girl. Not only did he miss the extra food at lunchtime, but he always had more trouble with the goats on those days. The animals seemed to behave better when their kind Heidi was around to guide them. When it grew very cold, Peter no longer took the goats out. This was his time to go to school. Heidi loved to ask him questions about his schooling, but Peter wasn't fond of answering the girl. He liked his job as a goat herder far more than he liked school. One evening he gave Heidi a message instead of answering her questions. Grandmother sent word that she would like you to come and see her, the boy said. It was quite a new idea for Heidi that she would go visit anyone. For the next few days she bothered grandfather so much about going that he finally gave in to her wishes. Grandfather rose from the table. He climbed up to the hayloft and brought down the thick sack to wrap the young girl in. Then he went to the shed and came out dragging a large sled. After climbing into the seat, he placed the girl comfortably on his lap. They took off like a bird gliding swiftly through the air. Within minutes they sailed to a stop in front of Peter's hut. There you are now. Go on in. When it begins to get dark you must start on your way home again. Then he left her and went back up the mountain, pulling his sled behind him. Heidi opened the door of the hut and stepped into the small dark room. It had a fireplace and looked like a kitchen. In the corner sat an old woman, bent over from age. She was spinning wool into yarn on a big spinning wheel. Heidi walked up to her. Good day, grandmother, she said. I have come at last. Did you think I would never get here? The old woman raised her head and felt for the hand that the child held out to her. Are you the child who lives at the top of the mountain? Are you Heidi? Yes, answered Heidi. I came down in the sled with grandfather. Is it possible? Why, your hands are quite warm. What does she look like, Brigitta? The old woman asked her daughter, who was sewing in the corner of the room. She is a beautiful little girl, much like her mother was. And I believe her grandfather must be taking care of her. She looks quite well, the younger woman said. During this time Heidi had not been standing still. She had been wandering around the room, looking carefully at everything there was to see. All of a sudden she exclaimed, Grandmother, one of your shutters is flapping back and forth. Grandfather will come and make it right for you. See how it keeps banging? Dear child, said the old woman. I can't see, but I can hear. There are many things wrong with this house. It creaks and rattles so much that I lie awake at night thinking the whole place may just fall down. There is no one to fix it for us. Peter doesn't know such things. Why can't you see the shutter? Heidi asked. Heidi, dear, I can't see anything. But if I take you out into the snow, there will be more light. Surely you will see it then. No, my dear. It is always dark for me now. Whether in the snow or the sun, no light can help me. Heidi wouldn't give up. But in the summer, grandmother, when the hot sun is shining down, it will be bright and beautiful for you again. Oh, child, I won't ever see the sunshine gleaming on the mountains or the yellow flowers again. At these words, Heidi broke into loud crying. In her sadness she kept saying, "Why can't someone make it light for you? Why can't you see?" Grandmother tried to calm the girl, but it was not easy to quiet her. Heidi didn't cry often. When she did, she could not get over her sadness for a long while. At last grandmother said, "Come here, my Heidi. Tell me how grandfather is. Tell me what you do up there. I knew him very well in the old days, but I have heard nothing of him for many years now. All I know I learned from Peter, who never says much." This brought a new and happy idea to Heidi. She quickly dried her tears and said, "Wait until I have told grandfather everything. He will make it light for you again. I am sure of it. And he will fix your house for you, too. He will put everything right." Grandmother was silent. Heidi began the lively tale of her life with grandfather and the days she spent on the mountain with the goats. She told grandmother what fine care the old man took of her and all about the beautiful woodworking he did around the house. Grandmother listened carefully. Both she and her daughter looked surprised at the wonderful things Heidi was saying about the old man. The young girl talked until the door burst open. "Peter," she cried when she saw the boy. Peter's smile was as big as the girl's. He laughed as she danced about him in glee. "Peter," grandmother said quickly. "How is your reading getting on?" "Just the same," was Peter's answer. "I had hoped he would be reading by now," grandmother told Heidi. "There is an old prayer book on the shelf. It has beautiful songs in it that I have not heard for a long time. I can no longer remember them to repeat to myself. I hoped that Peter would soon learn enough to read one of them to me." "But wait," the old woman continued. "How can you be home so soon? Surely the afternoon hasn't passed by so quickly." "Oh, but it has. And it's getting dark," said Heidi sorrowfully. "I promised grandfather that I would start back at the first sign of night. I must go." Heidi gave Peter a smile and picked up her coat. The old woman made a fuss about the child going out into the freezing air. Finally she sent Peter along to make sure Heidi made it up the mountain. They hadn't gone far before grandfather met them on the path. Heidi immediately began telling him about her afternoon visit. "Grandfather, tomorrow we must take the hammer and the long nails. We have to fasten grandmother's shutter and do some other work. Her house shakes and rattles all over. We must we?" "Who told you that?" asked her grandfather. "Nobody told me," said Heidi. "But grandmother lies awake at night and trembles with fear that the house will fall on their heads. Everything is dark now for grandmother and she doesn't think anybody will be able to make it light again. But I am sure you will be able to, grandfather. Think how awful it is for her to always be in the dark and to be frightened about what may happen. No one else can help her. Tomorrow we must go and make things right. We will, won't we, grandfather?" The child was clinging to the old man and looking at him in such a trusting way. He looked down at Heidi for a long while without speaking and then said, "Yes, Heidi, we will do something to stop the rattling. At the very least we can do that. We will go tomorrow." Grandfather kept his promise. Each day he went and fixed something new. And so the winter went by. After many years of joyless life, grandmother at last had something to make her happy. Her days were no longer filled with weariness and darkness. She now could look forward to Heidi's visits. Chapter 6: 2 Visitors. If the winter passed quickly, the summer passed even faster. Now another winter was coming to an end. Heidi was still as happy as she had been the day she arrived. She was now 8 years old. She had learned all kinds of useful things from her grandfather. Heidi knew how to look after the goats as well as anyone, but children her age were supposed to be in school. The schoolmaster from the town of Dorfly had already written to her grandfather about this twice. The old man had sent word back each time that he would not be sending Heidi to school. Finally, the pastor climbed the mountain to talk with grandfather about his choice. The child should have been in school a year ago, the pastor said. She is not a goat or a bird. She is a child. It is time for her to begin her lessons. Next winter she must go. Indeed, growled Heidi's grandfather. Do you really wish me to send a young child like that some miles down the mountain through storm and snow? Should I let her return at night when the wind is raging? Even I would run the risk of being blown down and buried in the snow. You are quite right, neighbor, said the pastor in a friendly tone of voice. I agree that it would be impossible to send her from here. But you must think of the child. It is time to come down from the mountaintop and live among your fellow men. It is too dangerous to live up here. Heidi would not survive if anything were to happen to you in the winter months. Let me assure you, sir, that I take very good care of the child. She stays warm here. My fire never goes out. As for going to live in town, the people there hate me. And I hate them. It is best that we stay away from each other. No, said the pastor. It is not best for you. The people down there do not hate you like you think. You need to make your peace with God and move down with us. You will see how happy you can be. The pastor stood and raised his hand. I am sure you will make the right decision. I know that next year we will be neighbors once again. Give me your hand and promise me that. Grandfather gave the pastor his hand and answered him calmly. I know you are only thinking of what is best for the child, but I am telling you now that I will not send her to school and I will not move down the mountain to live among the people. Then I hope God will help you, said the pastor. He turned sadly away, left the hut, and went down the mountain. The pastor's visit left grandfather in a grouchy mood. When Heidi asked him about going to see grandmother, he told her, not today. Then he didn't speak for the rest of the day. The following morning when Heidi asked about grandmother again, he answered, we will see. But before they had even cleared the lunch bowls from the table, another visitor arrived. This time it was Aunt Deet. Grandfather looked at her fancy clothes without saying a word. He could tell by her face that she was surprised at how well Heidi looked. She was so happy and well cared for that Deet hardly knew her. Leaving the child with her grandfather had always worried Deet a bit, so it was happily that she came to the old man with her wonderful news. A rich relative of the people she worked for had an only child. The girl was about Heidi's age and had to use a wheelchair to move about. She spent much of her time alone and needed someone to play with her. Deet had talked to the housekeeper about Heidi, and the woman had agreed to take in the little girl. This could be so wonderful for Heidi. She would live in a fancy house and always have someone to play with. And who knows, Deet said, if anything ever happens to the little girl, Heidi might just be lucky enough to dash. Are you finished with what you came to say? The old man asked the visitor. Ugh, cried Deet. She threw her hands up in the air. Anybody else would be thrilled with the news I am bringing you. Then you can take your news to anyone else. I don't want to hear it. Dee jumped up out of her seat like a rocket. If you think you can keep my sister's child up here without sending her to church or school, you are mistaken. I am responsible for her. I will not give in. Stop it, yelled grandfather. Leave at once and never let me see you here again. And with that he left the hut. You have made my grandfather angry. Heidi cried. She looked crossly at Deet. He will be fine, the woman said. Come now, show me where your clothes are. I am not coming, said Heidi. Nonsense. Deet said in surprise. You don't understand things any better than the old man. You will have things you never dreamed of. She went to the cupboard and took out Heidi's things. Then she rolled them in a bundle and handed the girl a hat. Come along now. This hat is shabby, but it will do for now. Let us go. I am not coming, repeated Heidi. Don't be stupid, Deet answered. You probably learned how to be stubborn from those goats. Listen to me. You saw how angry your grandfather was. He does not wish to see us ever again. He wants you to go away with me. You shouldn't make him any angrier. Besides, it's so nice where I am taking you. And if you don't like it there, I will bring you back. Your grandfather will be in a good mood by then. Can we leave and come back by tonight? Heidi asked. What are you talking about? Deet asked. I told you I would bring you back when you want. We will go as far as we can walk today. Then tomorrow we will take the train. It will bring you back again when you want it to, as fast as the wind. Deet now had the bundle of Heidi's clothes under her arm and the child by the hand. They went down the mountain together. Heidi heard Peter's voice before she saw the boy. Where are you going? He cried. He began to worry when he saw the girl clutching the woman's hand. I am just going for a visit to Frankfurt. I will be back.